Welcome to Uncharted Faith, a podcast from Trinity Church where we explore the deep and challenging questions of faith to discover God's truth. These discussions often expose areas of cultural or traditional belief in our lives that may need to be remodeled, realigned, or reaffirmed to reflect a life centered fully on Christ. Our guest for this discussion is Rodney Drury, pastor, author, and founder of Redneck Mystic Media. Rodney joins Pastor Paul Backhaus and myself, Eric Eidson, for a discussion on the nature, purpose, and pursuit of holiness and morality in our lives. We invite you to like and or subscribe to this podcast so you can be notified of future releases, including parts 2 and 3 of this discussion. If you would like to comment or contact us, we welcome you to visit www.trinitychurchmorton.org or respond in the comments section for this episode. Thank you for joining us as we dive deep into morality and holiness.
All right. Well, welcome to our podcast discussion, Rod. We're excited to have you here. We've been doing this podcast. This is our 5th discussion now, and so you are our 6th guest because one discussion had 2 guests in it. But if you remember, you came and participated in a Saturday night with us a while back when we were doing Converge on Saturday nights,
right?
And I was doing panel discussions, and a lot of this flowed out of that as we felt the season for those Saturday night Converges was kind of coming to an end. We're like, well, is there something new that we want to shift to? We loved the conversational style of really wrestling with whatever God was bringing to the table. But we just felt like the Saturday night Converges were kind of coming, that season was ending.
Right.
And this kind of grew up out of that. And so welcome to Uncharted Faith. That's what we decided to call it because we're exploring things that, as one person told us, God no longer has a map for us. He's got a compass. And so we're really exploring issues and topics where there's not a map to find your way through what spiritually is supposed to happen, but there is a compass, and that's Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's what Uncharted Faith has come to be. We'll take a topic like this one and just explore what Jesus might be leading us towards. And our topic today is morality and holiness. And this, for me, this topic kind of emerged last fall. I was preparing a kind of a contemplative experience for a conference that we were hosting here, and prepared just several tables of just contemplative exercises that people could engage in, and each one was a different topic, but with an idea of freedom from something to something else. So whenever God sets us free, right? He doesn't just set us free from something, he sets us free toward something, to something. And this table was a new concept that developed. Really, the Holy Spirit just dropped it on me. And I remember I typed it up, and I actually went to Paul and I just had this one come to me, and kind of let him look, because I was like, I think I may be pressing up against some boundaries here that I don't want to press up against, but it really excited me. And it was that difference between morality and holiness, and that there has been, within the church specifically, there has been a conflating of those two things that has happened. And so I really wanted to kind of get into this and explore it with you. You came to mind, not least because of your journey in spiritual mysticism, the mystic Christian journey. And so I want you, this is for those of you who are tuning in, we're talking to Rodney Drury. And I never know if I'm saying that right. Drury?
Yep. Sounds good.
Sounds good. All right. As long as you approve it, then we're good with
yes.
it. And I call you Rod because that's how I got to know you, and I assume you're still okay with that.
I am.
Okay, so Rod Drury. So you can call him Rod too, Paul. I'll give you that
thank
permission.
you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Rod, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Been looking
glad to
forward
be
to this conversation. You've been a friend of Trinity for decades, and so we just appreciate your willingness to talk with us. And and hopefully educate us, right?
Yeah.
And teach us something.
Teach us.
Oh, wise one.
Maybe I can ask a good question at least. Yeah.
So what I would love to hear from you just off the bat is to kind of, for people who are listening or watching us and don't know you,
Right.
just a bit of your story about not just kind of what brought you to this place, but even like, when did you first realize you were on a mystic journey with Jesus? Because, I personally believe we're all on a mystic journey with Jesus, just most of us don't realize it.
So, for me, as a very young child, grew up in the Assemblies of God family, Assembly of God church. So the moving of the Spirit, the things of the Spirit were there. Teaching, very Bible committed church. All those things were there. But I was in a dysfunctional, violent family, and this turmoil between home circumstances and this life of God represented in the church, and that church had a number of great saints that were redemptive in my life. But so there was this felt conflict, and added to it by the strange phenomenon that often when I prayed, God miraculously answered prayer as a child, for machinery, equipment, provision. It seemed all very natural to me, but telling the story through the little details and going back, it was strange how God answered my prayer, and I never really got any mentoring into that kind of life of, I'd call it spiritual intimacy, where you talk to God and it's relational and He shows up. And I'm not speaking now of a ministry type of ministry. I'm talking about just your daily life. The tractor's not running and you pray. And for some reason, mechanical things have often been a part of this miraculous nature between me and God.
So you have an anointing for mechanics, right? There you go.
Something like that. Yeah.
Faith healing in the mechanical.
So when that happens a few times, the texts of the scriptures now become automatically more interactive. And so there's not only the list of things that I should have been doing. I mean, I was way behind in the moral code in a lot of areas, and yet there was something that kept me connected to God from childhood even through today that was beyond the rules. It was an adventure of relationship, and I've always felt like I've been really, really bad at relationships. So because of that feeling, I think I've tried hard to say, how do you really have a relationship with God, an unseen spiritual being, not like us? Like, I mean, I have a hard enough time with my wife and kids. What's that one going to be like? So that intentionality of trying to figure that out has been a great joy of my life. It's just been a wonderful joy of my life to seek the Lord.
Well, I actually started to hear some of our topic coming out even in what you just shared with us. The church has a history of holding the line on some standards while letting others slip and the like. And so one of the things that I think we want to start with here is to kind of differentiate what is the definition of morality versus the definition of holiness. We are called a holy people, right. and so, but we all know, looking around, that we're oftentimes not a moral people. So, what's the difference between morality and holiness to you?
For me, morality comes from that word of a culture. I believe that's where it actually comes from, a set order of cultures. Like the Stoics before Jesus Christ came on the scene were very moral people. They set up a code, a pattern of behavior. Judaism had a pattern of behavior given from the Lord, so there was a code. But all the surrounding nations had patterns of behavior that were their moral codes. And so for me, morality is a moral code, and I believe in the New Testament, Jesus establishes a moral code. That these are rules for your well-being of life and the well-being of others. Not all moral systems are set up with that premise, but I believe maybe sort of basically Christianity, Christ set it up that this system of behavior is for your well-being, or we could even use the word happiness, is for your happiness and the happiness of others. So that's there. Holiness to me has like two dimensions. One is that there's this Old Testament concept of being set apart. So like you could take the wooden spoon, and if you removed it from your house and put it into the temple for an intended purpose, it was set apart, and so it became holy, right? So there is that could probably be called a ritual side of holiness, or maybe a tangible, whatever language you'd use. But it happens not because of any behavior, but because an item was deemed to be set apart unto the Lord, for the Lord. So, I mean, spoons couldn't be that, but cattle were holy, and then in the New Testament, we became holy in one of the passages it talks about being that holy people. Right. And I believe that reference is not to any behavior, but that we were set apart for him. Right. So that's one side of holy. And then the other side, I believe, comes from the root of the word meaning other than, or sometimes people call it uniqueness, or not like us. So holy is part of that thought of that word is through Scripture. One is it's set apart to God. The other, it's not like us at all. And that has then from that the tick list goes down like to uncreated, eternal, spirit. I mean the list gets big, but so here now we have this other side of holiness that is like if I went to the mystical roots, it takes you to the unknowable, unfathomable, crazy, wild. How do we even know it exists? Or and theology both in the East and the West has wrestled with that side of God and come up with their own rules of how it should be treated and things. But there's the God who is and is known and is unknowable. It's like, okay, that's a good Sunday morning.
And that's
sermon.
a mystery.
Yeah.
He is both known but unknowable. Yeah. And that is one of the great mysteries. We were just talking about this morning. That I'm like, man, I cannot serve a God that I can quantify, that I can understand. If I can fully understand him, he's not much of a God. Because I'm not much of there's not much going on that. If I can understand it, it's pretty simple. And so yeah, I love that he's both known and unknowable, because it does speak to the majestic nature of who he is. And I love excuse me, your description of morality as a code, a cultural code of conduct in essence. That's basically how I would describe it as too. It's the ways that a culture differentiates between what is right and wrong.
Yeah.
This is allowable, this is not allowable. And so it's very systematic in its nature, and creates what I call a cultural ethic, right? So you got and those, we were saying even earlier, those differ even from one office to another office. If you work in an office space, you have an ethic within that office that defines certain code of conduct that everybody's kind of expected to adhere to.
Right.
But you go into another office, and they're going to have a very different cultural ethic for that environment than what you were at in the other place. So, and then you say, okay, well, you've got the ethic of the Jewish culture in Jesus' day versus the ethic of the United States in ours. Those are two very, very different things.
Well, and we could see that in the scripture where they would have the Hellenistic Jews and then the Judean Jews, that they were all Jewish, but how they lived out their faith, and even within their own religion and their statements of faith, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one," right. They were divided because of how they practiced their Judaism, and it was all based upon that moral code. So I appreciate something that you said that I want to circle back around. You talked about it, as Eric pointed out, that it is, you didn't use the words, but it's a cultural agreement to be able to be in relationship with one another for our benefit, as well as just for the overall. And I recognize that as having great value. We were talking before this conversation, you have the Protestant work ethic, right? You have all these things that produce within our culture. So the question I want to pose to you, though, is, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of us, but we may circle back around to it if it's not time for it, is, so how did we then get to the place in the church where we conflate our morality with holiness? Because I would agree with you about your definition of holiness. And actually, I would include one more, which is just being near to God. That holiness is being near to God, but it's also being set apart. So I'd agree. But how did we get to that place where we conflate the two?
Go. Yeah. No,
so,
let's do it.
One of the struggles that we have as humans all through history and in our time is we often try to achieve a goal, we set a goal, and we flirt and we think and we ponder and we contemplate and we do all these things and try to arrive at the goal. But humanity, I think, has learned over and over again that if you want to get to a goal, you need some system. There's a way to live to get to the goal, some practical system. And I believe the Bible, the New Testament, and the Bible at large, Proverbs is a very do this, this
cause and effect.
It's not the only wisdom literature, but that's part of wisdom literature. Job has another story, and Ecclesiastes.
Right.
But that, so they through history, there's been groups of people in Judaism and in Christianity who developed systems. We can see it, and so in time, their system became the expression of Christianity, and the goal, although was still a goal, it lost its centeredness lost who God really is. And so through the development of systems, the pitfall we all face is that humans become more important and God becomes less important because I can empower myself to work the system. In a more modern religious history, as far as time goes, the holiness movement, it wanted to have communion and connection with God. Yeah. To do that, it started just building these systems, yeah. and there's no, there's hardly any checks and balances without some kind of cultural melee, yeah. or revolt or meltdown or something. But and even in the Desert Fathers, way back when,
yes.
there a little bit of elitism snuck. Things can sneak in. Yeah. That I'm just
mission creep.
Yep, I'm gonna work. I love the Lord. I care about Him. I'm gonna outwork you. Yeah. And when I say you, now I brought humanity. I put us in comparative to the goal.
So something I'm hearing, you didn't use this word, but there's the theological word telos. Right? What is, you're talking about goal, it's that, what is the completion? What is the vision of what we're trying to accomplish? And it's that, and you identified it as, I think with good intent, I think I'm going to bring it back to the Pharisees, right? Their intent, and we had a guest one time say that he has great sympathy for them, because so do I. I mean, my intent is to draw closer to the Lord. And if this works for me, it should work for you. And so what's the telos? To become like Christ. However, when there is that mission creep you talk about, that if that doesn't work for you, then you must be doing it wrong. And then we reinforce the system rather than embrace the idea that, well, wait a minute, you're set apart as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say even success leads to mission creep, right? This worked for me, so it will work for you, because God will do it the same exact way that he did for me. He's going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And that's not, you're right. And so we're going to assign the system, well, obviously, because Eric did this, this, and this and got this result, Rod, you have to do this, this, this in order to get that result.
Yeah. We have embraced comparative theology to its most wicked elements. We would actually teach what God has done for me, he'll do for you. Yeah. And yet, through the whole biblical story, God, I mean, I'm not saying there's no similarities, but God uniquely walked each person through their time and space and relationship with him. And then in our own lives. You know, when a 2-year-old runs up and snatches something out of the fridge, he can be morally scolded. You need to ask your parents. But when that 2-year-old's 40, he should have the full right to go in and get the ice cream out of the fridge. Yeah. But yet he's still, and because he's different stage of life. But if he actually has diabetes, and he goes and gets the ice cream, he may be actually committing a moral sin against himself. Right. So there's all this fluidity that happens that it's because we are our own watchdogs, and the Holy Spirit is much less of a watchdog. Now we have to police ourselves. So we have to make a system of rules that at least we can achieve. You know, if my list is too big, I'm not able to police myself or you.
I love the idea that I mean, the moral code is established as part of our immaturity, right? So I use a very similar example when I'm talking about this whole idea of what is the purpose of the law. If you've got a 2-year-old, you teach them don't touch the stove.
Right.
You got an 8-year-old, you're starting to teach them how to touch the stove in ways that are appropriate, right? By the time you're 20, you don't need instructions not to touch the stove anymore. You don't even think about not touching. You understand the concept of the stove and how it works, and you know that if you were to touch the stove, you would burn yourself, but you don't even think about that. That's not even part of your thought process anymore. You just simply don't touch the stove in ways that get you burned.
Right.
Right? Unless it happens by accident, but that's a different story, right?
Yeah.
But the whole point is that when we look at the moral code as a set of laws that need to apply throughout, our life, rather than a set of laws that are going to internalize a way of living, we're putting more emphasis on the code than on the way.
Yeah. So I do believe I believe we all need systems.
Yeah.
And so I'll do the years. So the 2-year-old don't touch the fire, the furnace. That's a time and place one. Yeah. And it relates to where that child is.
Right.
And then the child gets 20, and they should be able to use the stove to serve others, right? And cook. Yeah. And now they develop from self-protection to involving others. And then the thing we haven't gone to that we should to is, okay, how do I glorify God with the use of the stove, so that my living is in communal.
Yes.
Right. And I have a sense of it's like not that, but it's authentically significant to live my life with God rather than something that's randomly done on spiritual occasions.
Yes.
And so that becomes, as far as the use of morality, I believe a right use of morality is we're self-focused, then we're self and others focused, and now, okay, how do I do this with God? How do I live it?
That's at the core. We were talking about, man, if you are living a moral lifestyle, but you're doing it apart from the Spirit, then that moral lifestyle can be unholy. But applying a moral lifestyle in a holy way is what you're getting at here. So you learned how to do the right things, but if you're doing all the right things for yourself,
Right.
then that's not a holy application of morality. The holy application of morality is when you learn that all of these behaviors are intended to bless others and honor God, and it becomes about outside of yourself rather than within.
So I personally would almost argue, but not too convincingly, hopefully, that morality becomes insignificant if we encounter authentic transformation and holiness, because we no longer, morality has a tense like I'm living out of a code.
Yeah.
Right.
When in the end, I want to try to live out of a renewed heart.
That the law will be written on their hearts.
Yeah,
rather
so
than-
that I don't just behave differently, I become a different person.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so again, it's that telos, right? It's
All right. Well, so this was part 1 of our series with Rod Drury on morality and holiness. There's much within this series to unpack, and a couple of things that I'm like, I can't wait till we do the outro on part 3, because I think we're going to blow some people's minds on that one. But let's talk, or maybe it was part 2, but regardless, let's talk about that first part that we just listened to. What stood out to you?
Well, first I want to say I think Rod did a good job of giving us some working definitions for the conversation, where we asked him specifically what's the definition of morality, and then what's the definition of holiness. And I appreciated his definition. He was talking about morality is set by a culture, and that ultimately it's a culture. If we're going to talk about morality from the perspective of the kingdom of God, it's God's pattern for behavior. But I really appreciate he said morality would be for the sake of us as individuals, and then for the well-being of one another. And then he goes, and there's a third component that I thought was really important that he brought to the conversation, was it's for the glorification of God. So a lot of times we talk about morality as it is a blessing and benefit to us individually. Absolutely, right? We want to live a healthy whole life. Then, of course, as we mature, it's going to bless those around us and the family and so forth. But the third component is for the glory of God. But then holiness, as he established the definition, which is one that we would read in theology, is just being set apart for the purposes of God. And so that was what I appreciated. First of all, how he established some definitions for a good conversation.
I liked also in that component of holiness was the uniqueness or the otherness
Yes.
component. That there is something within this concept of being holy that does create an otherness, or the word that came to my mind was an alien component to us. That we become alien to everything else.
All right. Yeah. I see where you're saying
That our ownership, our allegiance, our home is now with God.
Yeah.
And not with any of these other things.
Yes.
And so all these other things become kind of alien to us.
And then in that, you brought out a point, just looking at the value of worshiping a God that is unknowable. So he's knowable and he's unknowable at the same time. And it's God's revelation, his love for us, which he allows us to see and experience him with encounter.
It's that he's knowable and unfathomable. We'll never
Right.
run out of more to know.
Absolutely.
And that's a beautiful thing. For me, one of the things that within this, as we discussed these concepts of what is morality, what is holiness, the phrasing that came to mind for me was it's the difference between having a code and a way.
Okay.
And that's a subtle thing.
Yeah.
But it's that idea that systems or cultural systems of morality, they can help us learn and grow. They can guide us in a way of existing.
Mm-hmm.
But when that becomes something internalized, when holiness drives our conduct versus a moral code driving our conduct, we're following a way, which was actually what early Christians called Christianity.
The way.
It is the way. So it was beyond a set of moral guidelines and into something that it became an all-encompassing way of being, not just behaving, but of being.
Right. And so as I was just taking notes, listening, he was saying doing the right things is important, but eventually can become with the wrong motive.
Right.
And I think holiness and our uniqueness being set apart, I think we're going to be getting into the second and third episode, which is purpose. We talk about that in a later time. But there's a holy application to morality that I think the two obviously will work together. Right. One thing I really enjoyed about the discussion too was you could not pin Rod down, right? You're trying to create this dichotomy, and it's just like we came up with.
He refused.
Exactly.
Yeah. He fought back against that idea that they're somehow separate. It's like they go together.
Right.
But one of the things, a quote of his that I actually wrote down because I was like, this is really solid. He said, "Morality becomes insignificant if we encounter authentic transformation and holiness."
Yes.
He says, I don't just behave differently, I become a different person.
Yes.
You can be a moral person and still be the same person you were when you were immoral.
Right. Absolutely.
Because it's just a change in behaviors.
Right.
But when you change who you are at the very core, the behaviors will automatically change with it.
Absolutely.
So
we can become experts in the system.
Yeah.
And that system and how we have set up a moral code, we can become experts. And we talked about that in regards to the book of Proverbs. The blessing of living out the book of Proverbs will bless our earthly life. But you can still be as much of an unbeliever as anyone else, but still live a well-balanced life just by following the book of Proverbs.
Right.
So
yeah. It becomes a system rather than a way.
Yeah.
So
overall, I mean, I really appreciated the introduction. I thought he really laid out some really good definitions. And as we continue to talk, I have to admit, as I was thinking it through, it's like I was getting all of these questions that were coming up. And one question I do have for you before we finish this up is, could you give us a definition of mission creep?
Okay. Mission creep is when you've been given a specific objective to achieve. But in the process of achieving that objective, it's almost as if the goals begin to shift a little bit.
Right.
So in order to do this, in order to paint this room, here's a great example of mission creep that you probably just experienced.
Okay.
All right. You're trying to prepare a house for someone to come into as a renter.
Right.
And you know you need to do a certain set of things in order to get that done. You need to paint the walls. You need to do this, that, and the other thing. But what happens is you become so focused on the painting part that it begins to become the mission.
Okay. Yeah.
Rather than the mission, again, was to prepare a house for people to come into. Painting may be a step along that mission or an objective to achieve in pursuit of that mission. But when painting becomes the mission, now all of a sudden you're just looking for more things to paint.
Right. Okay. Yep.
And that's called mission creep. Just kind of as your focus shifts because or broadens. That's another thing that can happen is you begin to take on more and more missions. And your objective gets broader and broader. When originally it was supposed to be, I'm preparing this house for someone to rent, then along the way you're like, well, maybe we could also start this business over here, and we could also, and all of this would go together. Like now that I'm good at painting, I can start a repair business where I'm running out and painting other people, and the mission has changed.
And I wanted to give you the opportunity to give that definition. Part of it is because I think that was a great way of talking about how mission creep, when we focus on morality, well, what's the goal? And we talked about the goal of really, in essence, to become like God, become like Christ.
And in this case, the mission creep quite often in the church is our goal. What is the mission of the church? Well, we have this ministry of reconciliation. So the mission of the church is to see people reconciled to God, to see the world reconciled to God. But we oftentimes will cultural morality change as that happens? Yes. But our mission crept off of reconciliation and onto creating a moral society.
Yes.
And that's where mission creep happened within the context of this discussion.
Well, thanks. I just want to throw that question out there for you.
All right. Well, again, we invite you to interact with and participate in this conversation. You can do that through the comments sections or through email. If you want to reach us via email, you can go to our website at www.trinitychurchmorton.org, and you can find our email addresses there. And then the next episode will be coming out with part 2 of this discussion, so we will continue with Rod Drury. So if you want to be notified of that next session and all future podcasts that we release, we want to encourage you to like and subscribe to this one, and you will get that notification each time a new one comes out. Thank you, and God bless.